"You picked the wrong house to mess with, old man." Those were the last words the Red Reaper's leader snarled before discovering that threatening a former Delta Force commander was the biggest mistake of his criminal career. On a cold Montana morning, James "Iron" Steele's peaceful mountain homestead became the target of the Northwest's most violent motorcycle gang. But as the ruthless outlaws surrounded his property, they failed to understand one crucial detail. The elderly rancher tending his horses wasn't some helpless retiree, but a legendary special operations veteran with over 200 successful combat missions under his belt. The story spans 72 brutal hours across the Montana wilderness as one man transforms from quiet rancher to tactical predator, using skills perfected in the world's deadliest combat zones. Steele would not only defend his home, but systematically dismantle the largest criminal network in the state's history. In biker circles, they still talk about the day the Red Reapers learned that some properties are protected by more than just locked gates. They're guarded by warriors who never lost their edge. The autumn wind carried a bitter chill as James Steele's boots crunched across the frost-covered ground of his ranch. Dawn was still an hour away, but decades of military service had ingrained early rising into his very bones. The horses needed feeding, and the morning perimeter check was as much ritual as necessity. 20 years since his last combat operation, and some habits never faded. His breath formed clouds in the cold air as he approached the stables. The property sprawled across 40 acres of Montana mountainside, remote enough to give him the solitude he'd sought after leaving the service, but close enough to civilization when supplies were needed. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles down, the mountain, just the way he liked it. The horses stirred as he entered, familiar with his routine. Shadow, his black Tennessee walker, nickered softly in greeting. Steele allowed himself a small smile as he began distributing feed. The simple routine of caring for the animals had helped him adjust to civilian life when nothing else could. After 30 years of combat operations, the transition hadn't been easy. His radio crackled to life, breaking the morning silence. "Iron, you copy? Got something you need to hear?" The voice belonged to Marcus Chen, former Army Ranger, and now local sheriff. They'd served together in Afghanistan a lifetime ago. "Go ahead, Marcus." Steele's voice remained quiet, calm. Another habit from his Delta Force days: control your voice, control the situation. "Those bikers I warned you about last week, Red Reapers, they hit Mike Thompson's place last night, tore up his fences, killed some livestock, left some pretty explicit threats. They're moving through the valley, targeting isolated properties." Steele processed this information while continuing his tasks. The Red Reapers had appeared in the region 6 months ago, gradually expanding their territory from Idaho. What started as a small-time motorcycle gang had evolved into something far more dangerous. "Mike's place is what, 15 miles north of me?" 12. "And Iron?" This wasn't random vandalism. They're methodical, targeting specific properties. Properties they think might be useful for their operations. Remote locations, good road access, clear sightlines. Properties like mine. Steele finished the thought. His tactical mind was already analyzing angles, approaches, potential vulnerabilities. The ranch sat at a crucial junction of mountain roads, overlooking 3 different valleys, perfect for someone wanting to monitor movement in the region. Got state police working on it, but you know how stretched thin we are up here. Might want to consider some extra security measures. Marcus's concern was evident. He knew Steele could handle himself, but he also knew the Reaper's reputation. Appreciate the heads up. Steele's response was measured, professional. Inside, his mind was already shifting gears, falling back on decades of tactical planning. Any pattern to their movements? Working on mapping it. One thing's clear, though, they're getting bolder. Started with minor vandalism, escalated to serious property damage. Last night was their first time killing livestock. Psychology boys who think they're establishing dominance, showing locals they can't be stopped. Steele crossed to the stable's entrance, scanning the surrounding forest with practiced eyes. The morning mist clung to the trees, reducing visibility. Good cover for approach, bad for early warning. How many at Thompson's place? Witnesses reported 12 bikes. But Iron, these aren't just thugs. Someone's coordinating them, planning their moves. The precision, the timing, feels professional. That caught Steele's attention. In his experience, motorcycle gangs typically operated on intimidation and brute force. Strategic targeting and coordinated operations suggested something else entirely. You think they've got military training? Some of them, yeah. Way they move, way they plan. Reminds me of some private military contractors I dealt with back in the sandbox. Steele's jaw tightened. He'd seen it before, former military personnel turning their training to criminal enterprises. The skills that made them effective soldiers made them dangerous criminals. Keep me posted on any movement. I'll start preparing. Already got patrols increased in your area, but response time up that mountain. I know. Steele's voice carried the weight of experience. I'll handle it. The radio fell silent as Steele completed his morning tasks. His movements remained calm, deliberate, but his mind was already cataloging resources, analyzing terrain, developing contingencies. The tactical skill set that had made him legendary in Delta Force didn't disappear with retirement. Inside his house, he moved to his office, a spare room that still reflected his military precision. Maps covered one wall, detailed topographical, surveys of the surrounding terrain. He'd chosen this property carefully, ensuring it could be defended if necessary. Old habits. The morning sun finally crested the mountain as Steele reviewed his security measures. Motion sensors covered the main approach roads. Cameras monitored key points, and he'd maintained his shooting ranges regularly. But if Marcus was right about the Reapers having professional training, he'd need more. His satellite phone buzzed, another remnant of his service days, more reliable than cell coverage in these mountains. The number was familiar. Sarah Connor, former intelligence officer now running a private security consulting firm in Helena, James. Her voice was professional, focused. They'd worked together on numerous operations. Just got word about Thompson's place? You're probably next on their list. Steele moved to his window, scanning the tree line. Already figured that out. What am I missing? The Red Reapers are just the visible part. Been doing some digging. Someone's bankrolling them, providing training, equipment. These aren't just bikers anymore. They're a private army in the making, explains the tactical precision Marcus mentioned. Steele's mind worked through implications. Any idea who's behind it? Nothing concrete yet, but there's a pattern. Similar. Operations popping up across the Northwest. Motorcycle gangs suddenly getting professional training, targeting specific areas. Someone's building infrastructure, establishing control over key transit routes. Steele checked his watch. If the Reapers followed their usual pattern, they'd wait a day or two after Thompson's place before making their next move. Time to prepare. but not much. "One more thing," Sarah added, her voice dropping slightly. "Remember Sebastian Drake?" Steele's expression hardened. Sebastian Drake, former Delta Force, discharged under investigation. They'd served together until Drake started showing signs of instability, taking unnecessary risks, endangering his team. "What about him?" "He's been spotted in the region, and some of the tactical patterns the Reapers are using, they're definitely Delta-level stuff." That explained a lot. Drake had always been brilliant at tactical planning, but his moral compass had deteriorated over the years. "He's training them. Looks that way. And James, he knows your location. Was asking questions about retired special forces in the area last month." Steele absorbed this information with professional detachment. Drake's involvement changed everything. This wasn't just about criminal intimidation anymore. It was personal. "Thanks for the heads up. Might need some of your resources before this is over." "Already got a team on standby. Just say the word." Sarah paused. "Be careful, James. Drake was dangerous before. Now he's had years to perfect his approach." The call ended as Steele began a detailed check of his equipment. In the garage, behind a false wall, his personal armory remained meticulously maintained. Not weapons of war, but carefully selected tools for property defense. Everything legal, everything properly registered. He'd learned long ago to prepare while staying within the law. The morning progressed as he methodically reviewed his options. The property's natural defensive features had been a key factor in his purchase. Clear fields of fire, elevated positions, multiple fallback points. But Drake would know all the standard Delta Force approaches. He'd need to innovate. His radio crackled again. "Iron got movement to report." Marcus's voice was tense. 3 bikes just passed through Carlton Junction, heading up the mountain. Scouts, probably. Understood. Steele moved to his observation post, a concealed position with clear views of the main approach. Through his binoculars, he spotted the bikes, still distant. Their riding pattern was professional, maintaining proper spacing, watching their sectors. "Definitely trained." "Want me to send a patrol?" Marcus asked. "Negative. Let them look. Better to know their pattern." Steele watched as the bikes slowly circled the outer edges of his property. They were good, he had to admit, maintaining just enough distance to avoid trespassing while cataloging every detail of his defenses. The morning sun climbed higher as James Iron Steele prepared for what was coming. The Red Reapers thought they were dealing with an elderly rancher, an easy target. Sebastian Drake knew better, but his arrogance had always been his weakness. They'd all learned soon enough why he'd earned his call sign in Delta Force. The bikes disappeared back down the mountain, but Steele knew they'd return. The real question wasn't whether they'd attack, but how. Drake would want to make a statement, prove he could defeat his former commander. The Red Reapers would want to demonstrate their power to the entire valley. Let them come, Steele thought as he continued his preparations. Some habits never faded, some skills never dulled. The Montana wilderness was about to witness what happened when criminals mistook a quiet retirement for weakness. The next 72 hours would remind everyone why Delta Force operators were considered the elite of the elite. The morning wind carried the promise of snow as James Steele began implementing his defense plans. The Red Reapers were about to learn a harsh lesson about choosing their targets, but first, he had to spring their trap. 20 years since his last combat operation, but some things you never forgot, like how to turn hunters into prey. The midday. Sun cast long shadows across Steele's property as he systematically fortified his position. His movements were deliberate, calculated, each action part of a larger strategy developed through decades of special operations experience. The horses had been moved to the far pasture, safely away from likely approach routes. No sense risking them in what was coming. "Iron, got some intel you need to hear," Marcus's voice crackled through the radio. "Those scouts, they're reporting back to a larger group at the old logging camp off Route 23. Local hunters spotted at least 30 bikes." Steele continued his work while processing this information. 30 bikes meant potentially 40 to 50 individuals, larger than their usual operations. "Any sign of Drake?" Nothing confirmed yet, but intercepted some radio chatter. There, using military-grade communications, encrypted channels, definitely his style. Through his binoculars, Steele surveyed the mountain roads leading to his property. The main approach was obvious, but he knew Drake would anticipate that. There would be secondary routes, carefully planned alternate approaches. They hit Thompson's place at night. Standard pattern? So far, yeah, all their major moves have been after dark. But Iron, something else. Got reports of unmarked vehicles in the area. Black SUVs, professional drivers. These aren't just bikers anymore. Steele's satellite phone buzzed. Sarah Connor's number again. "James, found something interesting in those files. The Red Reapers, they're not just expanding territory, they're establishing infrastructure for something bigger. Those properties they've hit all sit on key transportation routes, north, away from his ranch." Steele's tactical mind analyzed the movement. "They're splitting their force, make us think they're heading elsewhere, while their main group approaches from another direction." "Classic Delta move," Sarah agreed. "Drake's playing to his training. Question is, what's his real approach going to be?" Steele moved to his observation post, studying the terrain through experienced eyes. Drake had always been brilliant at tactical planning, but he had one consistent flaw. He overcomplicated things, tried to plan for every contingency. "Marcus, those bikes heading north, they're visible, obvious. But I'm betting there's another group moving more quietly, probably using the old Forest Service roads to the east. Already got people checking. But Iron, if they're coming tonight, you need to let me send some deputies up there." "Negative." Steele's voice was firm. "Drake will have analyzed local response. Patterns. He's counting on law enforcement trying to reinforce my position, probably has ambush points already set up." The wind shifted, carrying the first hint of evening chill. In the far pasture, his horses grew restless, sensing the tension in the air. Through his security feeds, Steele watched shadows lengthen across his property. Perfect conditions for a night operation. "James?" Sarah's voice carried new urgency. "Just intercepted more Chimera communications. They're implementing something called Protocol Echo. Mean anything to you?" Steele's expression hardened. Protocol Echo. He remembered it from joint operations with private military contractors. Systematic isolation of a target, cutting off all possible support before the main assault. "They're going to try to cut me off completely. Communications, power, any possible reinforcement. Make sure I'm totally alone before they move in." "Already happening," Marcus confirmed. "Getting reports of accidents blocking major roads in the area. Power companies showing mysterious maintenance issues that might affect your sector. Even got cell towers going down." Steele moved through his house, checking backup systems, solar power with battery storage, satellite communications, independent water supply. Once again, preparation was about to prove its worth. Sarah, can you still track those Chimera vehicles? For now. They're moving to new positions, establishing a perimeter. Professional work. They're covering every possible approach to your property. But James, these aren't just security contractors. These are elite operators, former special forces, maybe even some people we worked with. The implications were clear. Drake wasn't just bringing numbers, he was bringing highly trained professionals. People who knew the same tactics, the same techniques. This wouldn't be like dealing with common criminals. Iron got confirmation on those Forest Service roads. Marcus's voice was grim. Local rangers spotted at least 10 more bikes moving up, staying under tree cover, plus what looks like tactical vehicles. They're setting up staging areas. Steele checked his equipment one final time. Body armor, carefully maintained and updated. Communication gear, independent of any external networks. Night vision equipment that matched anything the contractors would have. Everything legal. Everything. Carefully selected for property defense. The sun touched the mountain peaks as James Iron Steele completed his preparations. Decades of special operations experience told him the attack would come tonight. Drake would want to demonstrate his tactical superiority, prove he could defeat his former commander on his own ground. Through his thermal imaging, Steele watched. Multiple heat signatures moving through the forest around his property. Professional operators establishing positions, preparing for a coordinated assault. They were good, he had to admit. Patient, methodical, following their training perfectly. But that was their weakness. They were following conventional tactical doctrine, even if it was advanced special operations doctrine. Drake had always been brilliant at planning complex operations, but he'd never fully grasped the most important lesson from their Delta Force days. Sometimes the best tactic was the one your opponent would never expect. The evening wind carried the sound of distant motorcycles as Steele moved to his final position. Let them come with their numbers, their technology, their professional training. They were about to learn why he'd earned his reputation in Delta Force. The night would remind everyone that some skills never faded, some warriors never lost their edge. The Montana wilderness was about to witness what happened when criminals mistook a quiet retirement for weakness. But first, James Steele had to spring their trap and show them why threatening a Delta Force commander was the biggest mistake they'd ever made. Darkness settled over the Montana wilderness as James Steele watched multiple heat signatures converge. On his property, the Red Reaper's motorcycles maintained radio silence, their engines muffled by professional-grade suppressors. Through his thermal imaging, he tracked their movement. Precise, coordinated, exactly as he'd expected. Iron, they've cut the main power to your sector. Marcus's voice was tight with tension. Phone lines are down too. County emergency services reporting technical difficulties with their communications. Protocol Echo in full effect. Sarah. Added through the satellite link. Chimera teams have established blocking positions on all major approaches. They're isolating you completely. Steele moved silently through his reinforced basement, monitoring feeds from his security system. The backup power hummed quietly, maintaining his tactical advantage. Status on those SUVs? 8 vehicles confirmed, moving to predetermined positions. These aren't just security contractors, James. Their movement patterns, their coordination. We're looking at former Tier 1 operators. The first snow of the season began to fall as Steele tracked multiple teams establishing their perimeter. Their approach was methodical, professional, identical to tactics he'd used countless times in special operations. Through his thermal imaging, he watched as they moved into prepared positions, creating perfect overlapping fields of fire. Iron got movement on the Forest Service Road. Marcus's urgency cut through the tactical channel. Heavy vehicles approaching. Military grade. Steele switched camera feeds, spotting the convoy. 3 armored vehicles designed for rapid deployment of tactical teams. Drake's bringing his serious hardware. James. Sarah's voice carried new tension. Just intercepted more Chimera communications. They're not just here to take your property. This is a demonstration operation. They want to prove they can defeat a Delta Force operator on his own ground. A motorcycle engine growled closer to his main gate, deliberately obvious. Through his scope, Steele watched a single rider approach, wearing the Red Reaper's colors but moving with military precision. The rider stopped, killed his engine, and reached slowly into his jacket. "Here comes the formal introduction," Steele muttered. The rider produced a handheld spotlight, sweeping it across Steele's front porch. A voice carried clearly through the snowy air. "Commander Steele, we know you're monitoring. Let's be professional about this." Steele recognized the voice instantly. Richard Viper Carter, former Special Forces, now Chimera's chief tactical officer. They'd run operations together in Afghanistan. "Your property's surrounded, Commander. We've got 36 bikes, 3 tactical teams, and enough hardware to take a small city. You've got no backup coming, no communications except what we allow. But this doesn't have to get messy." A new voice cut through the night, this one triggering old memories. "Come on out, Iron. Let's show these youngsters how real Delta Force operators handle business." Sebastian Drake. His voice carried the same arrogant confidence that had always been his weakness. Steele maintained his position, watching through multiple camera feeds as more bikes emerged from the forest. The Red Reapers formed a perfect perimeter, their positions covering every apparent escape route. Behind them, Chimera's tactical teams moved with professional precision. "Last chance, Commander," Carter's voice again. "We've got contracts to fulfill, timetables to meet. Your property's perfect for our needs. Clear views, multiple access routes, excellent defensive positions. Walk away with a generous compensation package, or this gets complicated." Through his thermal imaging, Steele tracked more teams moving through his eastern woods. They were good, using the terrain exactly as he'd expected. Drake had trained them well. "You've got 1 hour to respond, Iron." Drake's voice carried clearly. "After that, we do this the hard way. And just so you know, we're serious." Multiple explosions lit up the night as charges detonated along Steele's fence line. Professional work. Shaped charges designed to breach defenses without causing structural damage to valuable property. "That's just a sample," Drake continued. "Next demonstration won't be so gentle. 1 hour, Iron. Don't make me embarrass my old commander." Steele's radio crackled. "Iron, those explosions just took out your perimeter sensors." Marcus's concern was evident. State Police Tactical Unit is still 3 hours out, and they're being delayed by accidents on every major route. "James, this is bigger than we thought." Sarah's voice carried urgency. "Just decoded more Chimera communications. Your ranch isn't just going to be a forward operating base. They're planning to use it as a training facility, teaching their tactics to other motorcycle gangs across 3 states. Steele processed this information while maintaining surveillance. Through his thermal imaging, he watched Carter and Drake fall back to protected positions. The Red Reapers maintained their perimeter while Chimera's tactical teams began establishing advanced positions. "They're good," Sarah admitted. "Professional operators, military-grade equipment, perfect coordination. Most people would be calling for surrender right about now." A small smile crossed Steele's face as he implemented the first phase of his response. Most people didn't spend 30 years in Delta Force. Multiple signals transmitted from concealed positions around his property, activating systems he'd prepared for exactly this scenario. Instantly, the tactical situation began to shift. What the hell? Carter's voice carried genuine surprise as his team's communications suddenly filled with interference. Command, we're getting feedback loops on all channels. Someone's bouncing. Our own signals back at us. Steele moved silently through his house, years of experience guiding every step. The first rule of defeating superior numbers: disrupt their coordination. Iron, what did you just do? Marcus asked. Their radio traffic is going crazy. Simple physics, Steele replied calmly. They're using military-grade communications, counting on encryption to protect them. But even encrypted signals can be reflected, amplified, turned back on themselves. Creates chaos in their tactical net. Through his thermal imaging, he watched the Red Reaper's perfect formation begin to waver as their communications degraded. The Chimera teams maintained better discipline, switching to alternate frequencies, but precious minutes of coordination were lost. Commander! Carter's voice carried growing frustration. You're only delaying the inevitable. We've still got you surrounded, still got overwhelming force. That's your first mistake, Steele replied, breaking his silence. His voice carried clearly through the snowy air. You think this is about numbers? Multiple security lights suddenly blazed to life, their positioning carefully planned to create disorienting patterns. The Red Reaper's night vision equipment, professional grade but not top tier, was momentarily overwhelmed. Damn it, Iron! Drake's voice carried genuine anger. Now, you're not in combat anymore. This isn't some tactical exercise. We're taking this property one way or another. Steele moved to his next position, his movement silent despite the years since his last operation. You always did talk too much. Sebastian, another weakness you never corrected. Through his thermal imaging, he watched Drake's position stiffen at the subtle insult. Emotional reactions disrupted tactical thinking, another lesson his former subordinate had never fully grasped. All units, execute Protocol Delta, Drake commanded. I want that perimeter collapsed now. Show the old man what real tactical superiority. Looks like the Red Reapers revved their engines, preparing to tighten their containment pattern. Behind them, Chimera's tactical teams began advancing with professional precision, but Steele had been counting on this response. Iron, they're moving, Marcus called out. Multiple teams converging on your position. Watch and learn, Steele replied calmly as he activated the next phase of his defense. Suddenly, the snowy ground around his property came alive with unexpected hazards. Hidden obstacles emerged from concealed positions. Carefully prepared terrain modifications turned familiar approaches into tactical nightmares. Contact left. A Chimera operator's voice carried through the chaos. Ground's not stable, some kind of prepared defensive position. Steele allowed himself a small smile as he watched the professional operators discovering his preparations. Sometimes, the best tactical advantage was simply understanding your terrain better than your opponent. James, Sarah's voice held newfound respect. You've been planning for this kind of situation for years, haven't you? Let's just say retirement gave me plenty of time to prepare my property for uninvited guests. Through his thermal imaging, he watched Drake's tactical teams trying to adjust to the degrading situation. They were good, maintaining professional discipline despite the surprises. but their perfect plan was already starting to unravel. "All units, maintain formation," Drake commanded. "This is basic tactical deception. Don't let him distract you from the primary objective." But Steele knew better. In special operations, momentum was crucial. Once you lost the initiative, perfect plans became increasingly worthless. "Commander Steele!" Carter tried again, his voice carrying less confidence now. "You can't hold off this many professional operators indefinitely. Let's end this reasonably." "Reasonably?" Steele's voice carried across the snowy terrain. He brought an armed force to threaten a civilian on his own property. You've got 30 minutes before I start demonstrating why Delta Force operators earned their reputation." Through his surveillance systems, he watched Drake's position. His former subordinate's body language showed growing tension. He'd always hated when operations deviated from his careful planning. "Iron, those tactical teams are regrouping," Marcus reported. "Looks like they're preparing for a coordinated assault. Let them come." Steele moved to his next prepared position. Sometimes the best way to spring a trap is to let your opponent think they're still in control. The Montana night grew colder as snow continued to fall, covering the wilderness in white. But James Iron Steele felt a familiar calm settling over him. 30 years of special operations experience had taught him that superior numbers meant nothing without superior tactical understanding. Let them come with their motorcycles, their tactical teams, their professional operators. They were about to learn why Delta Force commanders earned their reputations in the first place. But first, he had to let them think their plan was still working. The night was about to remind everyone that some skills never faded. Some warriors never lost their edge. And Sebastian Drake was about to learn why threatening his former commander was the biggest mistake of his life. The tactical teams advanced through the snowy darkness, their movements precise despite the deteriorating conditions. Through his thermal imaging, Steele tracked multiple units converging on his position. Drake had divided his forces into 3 main elements, each one professional, well-equipped, and completely predictable. "Iron, they're moving in a classic pincer formation," Marcus reported through the secure channel. "Main force approaching from the north, while flanking elements swing wide to cut off any escape routes. Chimera teams are coordinating with surprising precision," Sarah added. "Despite the communications interference, they're maintaining tactical cohesion. These aren't just contractors, they're elite operators." Steele watched as the Red Reaper's bikes moved into supporting positions, their riders showing far more discipline than typical gang members. Drake had trained them well, turning common criminals into a coordinated military force. "Commander," Carter's voice carried across the snowy terrain. "Final warning. We can see your thermal signature. You're running out of defensive options." Small smile crossed Steele's face as he activated the next phase of his defense. Suddenly, multiple thermal signatures appeared across his property, each one mimicking human movement patterns perfectly. "What the hell?" A Chimera operator's voice showed genuine confusion. "Sir, we've got multiple targets. Can't distinguish the real signature from the decoys." Through his surveillance system, Steele watched Drake's reaction. His former subordinate's position stiffened as he realized the implications. Thermal deception devices. He's been preparing for this kind of assault. "All those years of paranoid preparation," Sarah commented through the satellite link. "You knew something like this might happen, didn't you? Let's just say, experience taught me to be thorough." Steele moved silently to his next position, his movements masked by the decoy signatures. Marcus, status on their perimeter? They're trying to maintain coverage, but those thermal signatures are forcing them to spread thin. Can't effectively cover all potential targets. The snow fell heavier now, further complicating the tactical situation. Through his advanced optics, Steele watched Drake's frustration growing as his perfect plan encountered unexpected resistance. All units, ignore the thermal signatures, Drake commanded. Focus on the main structure. He has to be operating from a centralized position. But Steele had anticipated this response. As Chimera's teams began concentrating their focus, he implemented the next stage of his defense. Suddenly, carefully positioned speakers activated across the property, each one broadcasting tactical communications on military frequencies. Contact front. Movement on the ridgeline. Possible hostile, Sector 3. The professional operators maintained their discipline, but the Red Reapers showed less resilience. Their formation began to waver as conflicting information flooded their tactical net. "Iron, that's brilliant," Marcus commented. "You're creating confusion in their command and control." "Oldest trick in special operations," Steele replied calmly. "When facing superior numbers, disrupt their ability to coordinate effectively." Through his thermal imaging, he watched Drake's tactical teams attempting to adjust. They were good, maintaining professional protocols despite the degrading situation. But their perfect plan was starting to show cracks. "Commander Steele," Carter tried, again his voice carrying growing frustration. "You're just delaying the inevitable. We've still got overwhelming force." "You've got numbers," Steele's voice carried clearly through the snowy air. "But you've forgotten the first rule of special operations. Superior force means nothing without superior tactical understanding." Multiple explosions suddenly illuminated the night as Steele detonated carefully prepared charges. Not lethal force, he was too professional for that, but precisely calculated to create tactical chaos. "All units, maintain formation." Drake's command carried desperate edge now. Don't let him dictate the tempo of this operation. But it was already too late. The carefully planned assault was devolving into exactly the kind of chaotic engagement Steele had prepared for. Through his surveillance system, he watched the Red Reapers' formation continue to degrade. "James," Sarah's voice carried newfound respect. "Those aren't just random defensive measures. You've been systematically degrading their tactical advantages." "Drake always did focus too much on complex planning," Steele replied as he moved to his next position. "Forgot that sometimes the simplest approach is the most effective." The night, air filled with confusion as Steele's integrated defense system continued its work. Thermal signatures appeared and disappeared, tactical communications overlapped and conflicted, and carefully prepared terrain features channeled movement exactly where he wanted it. "Iron, their command and control is breaking down," Marcus reported, with satisfaction. "Red Reapers are starting to bunch up, losing their disciplined spacing." Through his advanced optics, Steele watched Drake's position. His former subordinate's body language showed mounting frustration. He'd always hated when operations deviated from his careful planning. "All units, fall back and regroup." Drake's command carried genuine anger now. "He's playing us, using our own tactics against us." But Steele had anticipated this response too. As the tactical teams began their withdrawal, they discovered that their carefully planned escape routes had become tactical nightmares. "Contact. Rear." A Chimera operator's voice showed real concern. "Ground's been prepared. Can't maintain formation through these channels." Steele allowed himself a small smile as he activated the next phase of his defense, Suddenly, powerful lights illuminated carefully selected sectors, their positioning designed to create maximum tactical confusion. "James," Sarah's voice carried. "Warning. Intercepted Chimera communications. Drake's calling in his reserve force. 3 more tactical teams, plus heavy weapon support." "Let them come," Steele replied calmly as he moved to his next prepared position. "Sometimes the best way to defeat superior numbers is to let them commit fully to their mistake." Through his thermal imaging, he watched as Drake's reserve forces began their approach. They were fresh, well-equipped, and walking straight into exactly the situation he'd prepared for. "Iron, those new teams are bringing some serious hardware," Marcus reported. "Vehicle-mounted weapons, breach equipment. Looks like they're done playing around." "Good." Steele's voice carried deadly calm. "Time to show them why Delta Force operators earned their reputation." The Montana night grew colder as snow continued to fall, but James "Iron" Steele felt only professional focus. 30 years of special operations experience had taught him that superior numbers meant nothing when facing an opponent who controlled the tactical environment. "Commander," Carter's voice carried one last attempt at professionalism. "You can't hold off this many operators indefinitely. Let's end this before it escalates further." "You should have thought about escalation before threatening a Delta Force operator on his own ground," Steele replied as he initiated the final phase of his defense. "Now you get to learn why some warriors never lose their edge." The night erupted into coordinated chaos as Steele's integrated defense system reached full activation. Every tactical advantage Drake's forces thought they possessed suddenly became a liability. Their night vision equipment, state-of-the-art but predictable in its capabilities, was systematically degraded by precisely positioned countermeasures. Their thermal imaging, already confused by multiple decoy signatures, now faced an environment specifically designed to create false readings. "Iron, this is incredible," Marcus commented as he watched through his monitoring systems. "You've turned your entire property into one giant tactical trap." "Experience," Steele replied simply as he moved to his final position, "teaches you to prepare for every possibility." Through his surveillance system, he watched Drake's mounting frustration as his perfect plan continued to unravel. The Red Reapers' formation had completely broken down, their military training proving insufficient against a master of tactical deception. All units, full assault. Drake's command carried desperate fury now. Forget finesse, overwhelm his position with superior numbers. But that was exactly what Steele had been waiting for. Sometimes the best way to defeat an opponent was to let them think they were making their own decisions. The night was about to remind everyone why Delta Force commanders earned their reputations. Sebastian Drake was about to learn why threatening. His former commander was the biggest mistake of his life. Let them come with their numbers, their equipment, their professional training. They were about to discover why some warriors never lost their edge, why some skills never faded. The Montana wilderness was about to witness what happened when criminals mistook a quiet retirement for weakness. The night erupted into chaos as Drake's forces launched their full assault. Through his thermal imaging, Steele watched multiple teams converging on his position, their coordination degraded, but their numbers still imposing. The Red Reapers' bikes roared through the snowy darkness while Chimera's tactical teams moved with professional precision. "Commander," Carter's voice carried over the din, "you've had your demonstration. Now face reality. You're outnumbered, surrounded, and running out of options. Steele moved silently through his reinforced house, each step calculated. The incoming force was impressive. 3 tactical teams pushing from different directions while the Red Reapers maintained a mobile perimeter. Behind them, the new heavy weapons teams were setting up supporting positions. Iron, they're bringing up some serious hardware, Marcus reported through the secure channel. Vehicle-mounted automatic weapons, professional breach equipment. This is going to get ugly. James, more Chimera communications intercepted, Sarah added urgently. Drake's ordered them to take you alive if possible. They want to make an example, show what happens to anyone who resists. Through his surveillance system, Steele tracked multiple teams establishing breach positions. They were good, maintaining professional discipline despite the confusion he'd created, but that discipline was about to become a liability. All units, prepare for synchronized breach. Drake's command carried authority born of years of special operations experience. Multiple entry points, overwhelming force. Show the old man what modern tactical superiority looks like. Steele allowed himself a small smile as he activated the next phase of his defense. Suddenly, the snowy ground around his house came alive with unexpected hazards. Carefully prepared defensive measures turned standard breach positions into tactical nightmares. Contact front. A Chimera operator's voice showed genuine alarm. Ground's not stable. Some kind of prepared defensive position. The professional teams maintained their discipline, adjusting to the deteriorating conditions. But the Red Reapers showed less resilience, their formation wavering as more surprises emerged. Iron, their command structures starting to fracture, Marcus reported with satisfaction. Reapers are bunching up, losing their tactical spacing. Through his advanced optics, Steele watched Drake's mounting frustration. His former subordinate had always hated when operations deviated from careful planning. Now that planning was being systematically dismantled. All units, push through, Drake commanded. Ignore the distractions. Concentrate on primary objectives. But Steele had anticipated this response. As the tactical teams began their advance, carefully positioned countermeasures activated. Powerful lights strobed in precise patterns, their positioning designed to degrade night vision equipment. Thermal signatures appeared and disappeared, creating confusion in their targeting systems. James, Sarah's voice carried warning. Drake's, calling in his final reserve. 2 more tactical vehicles incoming, plus what looks like specialized breaching equipment. Let them come, Steele replied calmly as he moved to his next position. Sometimes you have to let your opponent commit fully to their mistake. The night air filled with chaos as Drake's forces discovered that every apparent advantage had been carefully analyzed and countered. Their superior numbers meant nothing when facing an opponent who controlled every aspect of the tactical environment. Iron, those vehicle-mounted weapons are setting up firing positions, Marcus reported. Looks like they're planning to suppress your entire defensive perimeter. Standard tactical doctrine, Steele commented as he activated his next countermeasure, which makes it predictable. Suddenly, the snowy terrain around the vehicles became tactically untenable. Hidden obstacles emerged, carefully designed to disrupt firing positions without causing actual damage. Professional operators found their carefully selected positions becoming increasingly worthless. Commander Steele, Carter tried one last time. You can't maintain this defense indefinitely. We've got unlimited resources, unlimited manpower. That's your second mistake, Steele's voice carried clearly through the chaos. You think this is about resources. Multiple explosions illuminated the night as Steele detonated more prepared charges. Not lethal force, he was too professional for that, but precisely calculated to create maximum tactical disruption. All units maintain formation. Drake's command carried desperate edge now. Don't let him dictate the tempo of this operation. But it was already too late. The carefully planned assault had devolved into exactly the kind of chaotic engagement Steele had prepared for. Through his surveillance system, he watched as professional operators discovered that their training had become a liability. James, Sarah's voice carried newfound respect. You're not just defending, you're systematically destroying their tactical cohesion. Experience, Steele replied simply as he moved to his final position. Teaches you that superior numbers mean nothing without superior understanding. The night grew colder as snow continued to fall, but James Iron Steele felt only professional focus. Through his thermal imaging, he watched Drake's mounting frustration as years of tactical planning were systematically dismantled. All units, full assault! Drake's command carried fury now. Forget protocols, overwhelm his position with everything we've got. But that was exactly what Steele had been waiting for. Sometimes the best way to defeat an opponent was to let them abandon their training in frustration. Iron, they're committing everything, Marcus reported with growing excitement. Red Reapers are abandoning their perimeter, Chimera teams losing their coordination. Through his advanced optics, Steele watched as Drake's perfect plan completed its collapse. The professional operators maintained their discipline, but the Red Reapers had devolved into chaos. Commander! Carter's voice showed growing concern. We're losing tactical control. These gang members, they're not maintaining position. That's what happens when you try to turn criminals into soldiers, Steele replied calmly as he activated his final countermeasure. Training breaks down under pressure. The night erupted into final chaos as Steele's integrated defense system reached full activation. Every tactical advantage Drake's forces thought they possessed suddenly became a critical weakness. Their night vision equipment, state-of-the-art but predictable in its capabilities, was systematically neutralized by precisely positioned countermeasures. Their thermal imaging, already confused by multiple decoy signatures, now faced an environment specifically designed to create false readings. James, Sarah's voice carried warning. Drake's ordering his remaining forces to converge on your position. He's abandoning tactical doctrine completely. Good. Steele's voice carried deadly calm. Time to show them why Delta Force operators earned their reputation. Through his surveillance system, he watched as Drake's mounting frustration finally overtook his professional training. The Red Reapers had completely abandoned their military discipline, reverting to the chaos of common criminals. All units, close quarters assault. Drake's command carried desperate fury now. Breach every entrance, overwhelm him with pure numbers. But that was exactly what Steele had been waiting for. Sometimes the best way to defeat an opponent was to let them think they were making their own decisions. The night was about to remind everyone why Delta Force commanders earned their reputations. Sebastian Drake was about to learn why threatening his former commander was the biggest mistake of his life. Let them come with their numbers, their equipment, their professional training. They were about to discover why some warriors never lost, their edge, why some skills never faded. The Montana wilderness was about to witness what happened when criminals mistook a quiet retirement for weakness. The tactical situation had evolved exactly as Steele had planned. Drake's forces, committed to their assault, had abandoned the careful coordination that made them dangerous. Now they were just numbers. Impressive numbers, but vulnerable to the kind of tactical expertise that had made Delta Force operators. Legendary iron. Marcus's voice carried growing excitement. State police tactical units have finally broken through those roadblocks, 20 minutes out. They won't be needed, Steele replied calmly, as he prepared to implement the final phase of his defense. Sometimes the best way to win a battle is to let your opponent defeat himself. The Montana night grew colder as James Iron Steele prepared to demonstrate exactly why some warriors never lost their edge. Drake had brought numbers, equipment, and professional training, but he'd forgotten the most important lesson from their Delta Force days. Sometimes the most dangerous opponent was the one who seemed most vulnerable. The tactical situation reached its critical point as Drake's forces converged on Steele's position. Through his advanced optics, he watched multiple teams abandoning their careful coordination in favor of overwhelming force. The Red Reaper's bikes roared through the snowy darkness, while Chimera's operators struggled to maintain professional discipline. Final warning, Commander. Carter's voice carried desperate authority. You've got 3 tactical teams at close quarters range. Don't force us to breach with maximum force. Steele moved silently through his reinforced position, each step calculated from decades of experience. The incoming assault was impressive. Nearly 40 operators plus the gang members all focused on his location. But numbers meant nothing when facing an opponent who controlled the tactical environment. Iron, they're setting up breaching charges, Marcus reported through the secure channel. Multiple entry points, professional-grade equipment. Whatever you're planning, better do it fast. James intercepted more Chimera communications, Sarah added urgently. Drake's ordered them to take you alive if possible. Something about making an example for their other operations. Through his surveillance system, Steele tracked the final positioning of assault teams. They had abandoned their careful tactical doctrine in favor of pure force, exactly as he'd anticipated. All units synchronized breach in 30 seconds. Drake's command carried fury born of mounting frustration. I want that house breached from every angle. Show him what real tactical superiority looks like. Steele allowed himself a small smile as he activated the final phase of his defense. Suddenly, the entire tactical situation transformed. What had appeared to be a vulnerable position became something else entirely. Contact front! A Chimera operator's voice showed genuine alarm. The house, this isn't standard construction. The professional teams tried to maintain their discipline, but they had committed themselves to a fatal mistake. Their breaching charges, carefully placed according to standard tactical doctrine, encountered reinforcement they hadn't expected. Iron, this is incredible, Marcus commented as he watched through monitoring systems. You've turned your entire house into a tactical fortress. Experience, Steele replied simply as he moved to his final position. Teaches you to prepare for every possibility. The night erupted into chaos as multiple breaching charges detonated simultaneously. But instead of creating entry points, they merely revealed the true nature of Steele's defenses. Reinforced walls, tactical barriers, and carefully prepared counter-breach positions turned their assault into a tactical nightmare. All units! Push through, Drake commanded desperately. I don't care what kind of reinforcement he's got. Overwhelm him with superior numbers. But Steele had been counting on this response. As the tactical teams tried to force entry, they discovered that every apparent vulnerability had been carefully calculated. Their superior numbers became a liability in the confined spaces he had prepared. "James," Sarah's voice carried warning. "Drake's ordering his remaining vehicles to prepare for direct assault. They're getting desperate." "Good," Steele replied calmly as he activated his next countermeasure. "Sometimes you have to let your opponent commit fully to their mistake." The night air filled with confusion as Drake's forces discovered that their carefully planned assault had become a tactical disaster. Their superior numbers meant nothing when facing an opponent who had prepared for exactly this scenario. "Iron, the Red Reapers are breaking formation completely," Marcus reported with satisfaction. "They're not used to this kind of resistance, starting to fall back to basic gang tactics." Through his advanced optics, Steele watched Drake's mounting frustration. As years of tactical planning disintegrated, his former subordinate had always excelled at complex operations, but he'd forgotten the most important lesson from their Delta Force days. Sometimes the simplest defense was the most effective. "Commander Steele," Carter's voice showed growing desperation. "What the hell kind of defenses are these? This isn't standard tactical hardening." "That's your final mistake," Steele's voice carried clearly through the chaos. "You thought you were assaulting a house. You're actually attacking a prepared defensive position with 30 years of special operations experience built into every inch." Multiple explosions illuminated the night as Steele activated more countermeasures. Not lethal force, he was too professional for that, but precisely calculated to create maximum tactical disruption. "All units, fall back and regroup." Drake's command carried genuine fear now. He's turned the entire structure into a kill zone, but it was too late. The carefully planned assault had devolved into exactly the kind of chaotic engagement Steele had prepared for. Through his surveillance system, he watched as professional operators discovered that their training had become a fatal liability. "James," Sarah's voice carried newfound respect. "You're not just defending, you're systematically destroying their entire tactical concept." "Experience," Steele replied simply as he moved to his next position, "teaches you that superior numbers mean nothing when your opponent controls the battlefield completely." The night grew colder as snow continued to fall, but James Iron Steele felt only professional focus. Through his thermal imaging, he watched Drake's mounting panic as years of tactical planning were systematically dismantled. "All units, full withdrawal." Drake's command carried desperation now. "Fall back to secondary positions. We need to completely rethink this assault." But that was exactly what Steele had been waiting for. Sometimes the best way to defeat an opponent was to let them realize the full extent of their mistake. "Iron, they're breaking contact," Marcus reported with growing excitement. "Complete tactical withdrawal. The Red Reapers are already abandoning their positions." Through his advanced optics, Steele watched as Drake's perfect plan completed its collapse. The professional operators maintained some discipline, but the gang members had reverted to chaos completely. "Commander," Carter's voice showed total defeat. "We've got multiple casualties from our own breaching charges. This position, it's something else entirely." "That's what happens when you threaten a Delta Force operator in his own territory," Steele replied calmly as he prepared his final move. "You force him to demonstrate why some warriors never lose their edge." The night erupted into final chaos as Steele's integrated defense system reached full activation. Every tactical advantage Drake's forces thought they possessed had been systematically stripped away, leaving them exposed and vulnerable. "James," Sarah's voice carried warning. "Drake's ordering his remaining forces to abandon all equipment and withdraw completely. He's in full retreat." "Perfect," Steele's voice carried deadly calm. "Time to show them why Delta Force operators earned their reputation." Through his surveillance system, he watched as Drake's mounting frustration finally overtook his professional judgment. The Red Reapers had completely abandoned any pretense of military discipline, fleeing into the snowy night like the criminals they were. All units, full retreat. Drake's command carried total defeat now. Abandon all non-essential equipment. Get out of his kill zone immediately. But that was exactly what Steele had been waiting for. Sometimes the best way to defeat an opponent was to let them destroy their own operational capability in panic. The night was about to remind everyone why Delta Force commanders earned their reputations. Sebastian Drake was about to learn why threatening his former commander was the biggest mistake of his life. Let them flee with their broken equipment, their shattered confidence, their ruined professional reputation. They were about to discover why some warriors never lost their edge, why some skills never faded. The Montana wilderness was about to witness what happened when criminals mistook a quiet retirement for weakness. The tactical situation had evolved exactly as Steele had planned. Drake's forces, committed to their panicked retreat, had abandoned not just their careful coordination, but their essential equipment as well. Now they were just scattered groups, impressive numbers in retreat, but vulnerable to the kind of tactical expertise that had made Delta Force operators legendary. "Iron," Marcus's voice carried pure satisfaction. "State Police tactical units are 5 minutes out. Want me to direct them to blocking positions?" "Negative," Steele replied calmly, as he prepared to implement the final phase of his operation. Sometimes the best way to win a battle is to let your opponent defeat himself completely. The Montana night grew colder as James Iron Steele prepared to demonstrate exactly why some warriors never lost their edge. Drake had brought numbers, equipment, and professional training, but he'd forgotten the most important lesson from their Delta Force days. Sometimes the most dangerous opponent was the one who seemed most vulnerable. Through his surveillance system, Steele watched as Drake's forces completed their total collapse. The Red Reapers had fled in all directions, abandoning bikes and equipment in their panic. Chimera's professional operators maintained better discipline, but their withdrawal was still chaotic and costly. "Commander!" Carter's final transmission carried complete defeat. "Whatever you've got planned, we're done. Total withdrawal, no conditions," but Steele wasn't finished yet. Sometimes victory wasn't just about defeating your opponent, it was about ensuring they never made the same mistake again. The tactical situation reached its final phase as Steele tracked Drake's retreating forces through his advanced optics. The Red Reapers had scattered completely, abandoning their bikes and equipment in blind panic. Chimera's professional operators maintained better discipline, but their withdrawal was still chaotic and disorganized. "Iron, you should see this," Marcus reported with satisfaction. "Got drones tracking their retreat. Complete tactical collapse. They're leaving millions in equipment behind." "James intercepted their final communications," Sarah added. "Drake's reputation in the private military community is finished. No contractor will trust his tactical planning after this disaster." Through his thermal imaging, Steele watched various heat signatures fleeing through the snowy darkness. The carefully planned assault had transformed into a complete rout, exactly as he'd anticipated. "Commander!" Carter's voice carried across the chaos. Full withdrawal confirmed. Whatever you're planning, we're done here. But Steele had one final lesson to deliver. Moving silently through his reinforced position, he activated the last phase of his defense. Suddenly, the retreating forces discovered that their escape routes had been carefully prepared as well. Contact rear. A Chimera operator's voice showed genuine panic. The access roads, they're completely blocked. The professional teams tried to maintain some coordination, but their withdrawal had become a tactical nightmare. Every apparent escape route channeled them exactly where Steele wanted them. Ushan, state police tactical units are setting up blocking positions, Marcus reported. Got roadblocks on every major route. These guys aren't going anywhere. Time to finish this, Steele replied calmly as he moved to implement his final maneuver. Through his surveillance system, he tracked Drake's position. His former subordinate had fallen back to what he thought was a defensive position with his remaining loyal operators. James, Sarah's voice carried warning. Drake's trying to rally. His remaining forces looks like he's planning some kind of last stand. Classic Sebastian, Steele commented as he activated his next countermeasure. Always did prefer dramatic gestures over tactical reality. The night air filled with confusion as Drake's final position became tactically untenable. Carefully positioned lights and sound systems created complete disorientation, while thermal decoys made accurate targeting impossible. All remaining units form up on my position. Drake's command carried desperate authority. We're not letting him dictate the final terms. But Steele had anticipated this response. As the loyal operators tried to reach Drake's position, they discovered that every approach had been prepared for exactly this scenario. "Iron, this is beautiful," Marcus commented as he watched through monitoring systems. "You're not just defeating them, you're systematically dismantling their entire operational capability." Through his advanced optics, Steele watched Drake's mounting frustration as his final attempt at resistance crumbled. His former subordinate had always excelled at complex planning, but he'd never mastered the art of tactical adaptation. "Commander Steele," Drake's voice showed growing desperation. "You've made your point. Let's end this professionally." "Professionally?" Steele's voice carried deadly calm. "You brought armed contractors to threaten a civilian on his own property. You crossed that line hours ago. Multiple lighting systems activated simultaneously, creating perfect disorientation in Drake's final position. His remaining operators, professional but exhausted, found themselves completely unable to maintain tactical cohesion. All units scatter and evade. Drake's command carried total defeat now. Every man for himself. Get clear of his control zone. But that was exactly what Steele had been waiting for. Sometimes the best way to complete a victory was to let your opponent destroy their own command structure. "James," Sarah's voice carried satisfaction. "Intercepted communications show complete breakdown in their chain of command. Drake's lost all tactical control." "Experience," Steele replied simply as he moved to his final position. "Teaches you that victory isn't just about defeating your opponent. It's about ensuring they never try the same mistake twice." Vandalize grew colder as snow continued to fall, but James' Iron Steele felt only professional focus. Through his thermal imaging, he watched Drake's last attempt at resistance collapse completely. "Iron, state police have secured the outer perimeter," Marcus reported. "Got multiple arrests in progress. These guys are done." Through his advanced optics, Steele tracked various surrender signals as professional operators realized the futility of further resistance. Even Carter, Chimera's tactical commander, had ordered his remaining teams to stand down. "Commander." Drake's voice carried one final attempt at authority. "You can't just destroy everything we've built. We had plans, contracts, an entire operation ready to launch." "That's your final mistake," Steele replied calmly as he activated the last phase of his operation. "You thought this was about business. This was about reminding everyone why some lines should never be crossed." The night erupted into final chaos. As Steele's integrated defense system completed its work, every escape route, every hiding position, every possible tactical advantage had been systematically eliminated. "James," Sarah's voice carried pure respect. "Just got confirmation. Chimera's board of directors is already disavowing all connection to this operation. Drake's finished in the private military sector." "Good," Steele's voice carried deadly calm. "Time to collect what's left." Through his surveillance system, he watched as state police tactical units began systematic arrests. The Red Reapers who hadn't fled were surrendering without resistance, while Chimera's professional operators maintained enough discipline to surrender properly. "Iron got eyes on Drake," Marcus reported urgently. "He's trying to reach one of their abandoned vehicles. Looks like he's got some kind of case with him." Steele's attention focused immediately. Through his thermal imaging, he spotted Drake moving through the snowy darkness, clutching what appeared to be a hardened tactical. "Case James, that case," Sarah's voice carried sudden urgency. "According to Chimera's communications, it contains complete operational plans, details of their entire criminal network." "Perfect." Steele moved silently through the night, decades of special operations experience guiding every step. Sometimes, the best way to end an operation was to let your opponent deliver the final evidence personally. Drake's movements were panicked now, all pretense of tactical discipline abandoned. Through his advanced optics, Steele watched his former subordinate stumbling through the snow, desperately trying to reach a vehicle that would never start. "Sebastian," Steele's voice carried across the darkness, "always did have trouble accepting defeat." Drake spun around. The tactical case clutched tightly. His face showed complete shock as he realized Steele had somehow flanked his position perfectly. "How?" Drake's voice carried genuine disbelief. "You're supposed to be retired, living the quiet life. We had this planned for months." "That's what you never understood," Steele replied calmly as he emerged from the shadows. "Some skills never fade. Some warriors never lose their edge." The Montana night grew absolutely still as James Iron Steele faced his former subordinate. State police tactical units were approaching, but this final confrontation belonged to the two Delta Force operators. "It's over, Sebastian," Steele's voice carried absolute authority. "Time to remember what the word surrender means." Drake's shoulders slumped as the last of his resistance crumbled. The tactical case dropped into the snow as decades of professional training finally reasserted itself. "You could have been part of this," Drake muttered as police units approached their position. "We had everything planned: territory, infrastructure, an entire private military empire." "That's what you never understood," Steele replied as he watched his former subordinate being taken into custody. "Some things are more important than empire building. Some lines should never be crossed." The tactical situation had reached its final resolution. Drake's forces had been completely defeated, their equipment captured, their operational plans seized. But more importantly, a message had been sent that would resonate through both the criminal and private military communities. "Iron, Marcus's voice carried pure satisfaction. Final count. 32 arrests, including Drake and most of Chimera's tactical leadership. The Red Reapers are finished as an organization. James, Sarah added, just got word. 3 other criminal operations in the region are already pulling back, abandoning their territories. Seems your message was received loud and clear. The Montana wilderness grew quiet as state police completed their operation. James Iron Steele watched. As various vehicles were impounded, equipment was catalogued, and prisoners were processed. Sometimes victory wasn't just about defeating your opponent. It was about ensuring the lesson remained permanent. Through his thermal imaging, he watched the last of the police units preparing to depart. The night had reminded everyone why Delta Force commanders earned their reputations, why some warriors never lost their edge. But more importantly, it had shown what happened when criminals mistook a quiet retirement for weakness. Dawn broke over the Montana wilderness as state police tactical units completed their operation. James Steele watched from his reinforced position as various teams processed evidence and catalogued abandoned equipment. The snowy ground was littered with discarded tactical gear, testament to how completely Drake's forces had collapsed. Iron, final numbers coming in, Marcus reported with satisfaction. 32 arrests, including Drake and all senior Chimera leadership. Seized equipment value, already exceeding $5 million. State Police Tactical Commander says it's the biggest single operation takedown he's ever seen. James, you're going to want to hear this, Sarah added through the satellite link. That case Drake was carrying, complete operational plans, details of their entire criminal network across 3 states, FBI's already mobilizing task forces. Through his thermal imaging, Steele tracked the systematic police operation unfolding across his property. Professional evidence teams were documenting everything, building a case that would dismantle multiple criminal enterprises. Commander Steele, the voice belonged to Captain Reynolds, State Police Tactical Commander. Mind if I come up? Think. You'll want to see what we found in those vehicles. Steele moved to his front entrance, finally deactivating his integrated defense system. The morning light revealed the true extent of what his preparation had accomplished. Abandoned motorcycles, tactical vehicles, and professional equipment scattered across his property. Quite a night's work, Reynolds commented as he approached, maintaining professional courtesy. Got to admit, when we first got reports of major tactical engagement up here, we thought it was exaggerated. Now we're thinking the report's understated. Through his surveillance system, Steele watched various police teams securing the perimeter. The Red Reapers who'd been arrested were being processed separately from Chimera's professional operators. Even in custody, the difference in their discipline was obvious. Iron, you need to see this. Marcus's voice carried new urgency. Going through Drake's tactical communications, this wasn't just about your property. They were planning to use it as a template, take over strategic locations across the entire Northwest. James, Sarah added, Chimera's board of directors is in complete damage control. They're claiming Drake went rogue, acted without authorization, but those operational plans tell a different story. This goes higher. Steele moved through his property with Reynolds, surveying the aftermath of the night's engagement. Every piece of abandoned equipment told the same story. Professional operators completely outmaneuvered by superior tactical understanding. Got to ask, Reynolds said carefully as they examined one of the abandoned tactical vehicles. Some of these defensive measures They're beyond anything we've seen. Mind telling me how long you've been preparing for something like this? Experience teaches you to be thorough, Steele replied simply. Through his advanced optics, he spotted more evidence teams approaching the reinforced positions that had proven so crucial. "Commander," a new voice called out. FBI Special Agent Thompson approached their position, looking both impressed and concerned. "Just finished preliminary review of those operational plans. This was meant to be their showcase operation, prove they could defeat any resistance, no matter how well prepared." Steele watched as more federal units began arriving. The scale of Drake's operation was becoming clear. This hadn't just been about criminal territory, but about establishing private military control over strategic locations. "Iron got something interesting," Marcus reported. "Going through seized communications. After your first countermeasures hit, Drake was ordered to withdraw. Someone higher up realized what they were dealing with, but he refused, wanted to prove he could beat his old commander." "Classic Sebastian," Steele commented as he surveyed more abandoned equipment. "Always did let emotion override tactical judgment." The morning sun climbed higher as various law enforcement teams continued their work. Through his surveillance system, Steele watched as Drake was transferred to federal custody. His former subordinate's face showed complete defeat. Not just tactical, but psychological. "Commander Steele." Carter's voice carried professional respect as he was led to a transport vehicle. "For what it's worth, you proved your point. Some skills really never fade." Through his thermal imaging, Steele tracked more evidence teams discovering hidden equipment caches. The Red Reapers had abandoned everything in their panic, including material that would link them to crimes across multiple states. "James," Sarah's voice carried new information. "Just intercepted some interesting communications. 3 other criminal organizations in the region are already pulling back, abandoning their territories. Seems your message got through. Sometimes the best victory isn't just about defeating your opponent," Steele replied as he watched more federal units arriving. "It's about ensuring the lesson remains permanent." Reynolds approached again, holding a tablet displaying various tactical readings. "Mind explaining how you managed to completely neutralize their night vision capability? Our technical teams are saying some of these countermeasures are beyond cutting edge." "Experience," Steele answered simply. Through his advanced optics, he spotted more abandoned bikes being recovered from the forest. The Red Reapers' panic had been complete. They'd fled without even attempting to hide their equipment. "Iron got final confirmation," Marcus reported with satisfaction. "State police have roadblocks on every major route. Already caught 3 groups of Reapers trying to flee the state. This operation is completely finished." The morning light revealed more details of the night's engagement. Impact marks from breaching charges showed how completely Drake's forces had committed to their assault, but they also showed how thoroughly Steele's preparations had defeated them. "Commander," Agent Thompson approached again. "Found something interesting in those operational plans. They had similar operations planned for 6 other locations, strategic properties all owned by former military personnel. Your resistance here, you probably saved a lot of lives." Steele moved through his property, cataloging damage and noting needed repairs. The engagement had been intense, but his preparations had minimized any serious structural impacts. "James," Sarah's voice carried new respect. "Just got word from some old contacts. What happened here? It's already becoming legendary in special operations circles. The night a retired Delta Force commander reminded everyone why some warriors never lose their edge." Through his surveillance system, Steele watched as more evidence was processed. The scale of Drake's operation was still emerging. This hadn't just been about criminal territory, but about establishing a private military empire. "Iron, you're not going to believe this," Marcus reported. "Going through their tactical communications. After your defense is activated, some of Chimera's professional operators actually switched sides, refused to continue the assault, said they recognized genuine Delta Force tactical superiority when they saw it." The morning progressed as various law enforcement teams completed their work. Reynolds approached one final time, holding more tactical readings. "Got to ask, those thermal deception devices, the communications countermeasures, any chance you'd be willing to consult with our tactical units? Show us how to implement similar defenses?" Steele allowed himself a small smile as he surveyed his property. Sometimes victory wasn't just about defeating your opponent. It was about ensuring the lesson benefited others. Through his advanced optics, he watched the last of Drake's forces being processed. The night had reminded everyone why Delta Force commanders earned their reputations, why some warriors never lost their edge. But more importantly, it had shown what happened when criminals mistook a quiet retirement for weakness. "James," Sarah's voice carried final confirmation. "Just got word. 3 more criminal organizations in adjacent states are already disbanding. Seems no one wants to risk facing similar tactical expertise. You didn't just win a battle here. You changed the entire regional dynamic." The Montana wilderness grew quiet as the last law enforcement units prepared to depart. Sometimes victory was about more than just defeating your opponent. It was about ensuring the message resonated far beyond the immediate engagement. Through his thermal imaging, Steele watched various teams completing their final tasks. The night had proven that some skills never faded. Some warriors never lost their edge. But more importantly, it had reminded everyone why threatening a Delta Force commander was always the biggest mistake a criminal could make. Midday sun shone over Steele's property as the last law enforcement units prepared to depart. Nearly 6 hours had passed since Drake's operation collapsed, and the full impact was still emerging. Evidence teams had finished processing the scattered equipment that told the story of a complete tactical defeat. "Iron got some interesting feedback from State Police Command," Marcus reported. "Their tactical analysts are still trying to understand how you managed to neutralize superior numbers so completely. They're calling it a textbook example of defensive superiority." "James, you're going to want to hear this," Sarah added through the secure channel. Going through more of Drake's operational plans. What they planned for your property was just the beginning. They had similar operations scheduled across 5 states. Through his thermal imaging, Steele watched various teams completing their final tasks. Professional evidence collection had documented everything, creating a case that would dismantle criminal networks across the entire Northwest. Commander Steele, FBI Special Agent Thompson approached, holding detailed tactical reports. "Just finished our preliminary analysis. What you accomplished here, it's going to change how we approach defensive operations against private military contractors." Steele moved through his property, surveying the aftermath in daylight. Abandoned vehicles, discarded weapons, scattered tactical gear, all testament to how completely Drake's forces had been outmaneuvered. "Iron, more information coming in," Marcus continued. "State police intercepted 3 more groups of Red Reapers trying to flee the region. They're completely broken as an organization. No leadership, no structure, just scattered criminals running for safety. Through his surveillance system, Steele tracked the final law enforcement activities. The professional precision of the evidence teams contrasted sharply with the chaos left by Drake's retreating forces. "James got confirmation from my contacts," Sarah reported. "Chimera's board of directors is in emergency session. Their entire tactical division is being shut down. Drake's failure here exposed their whole criminal enterprise." Agent Thompson approached again, his expression showing professional respect. "Commander, those defensive measures you implemented, they're beyond anything in our current tactical doctrine. Any chance you'd be willing to conduct some training sessions with our tactical units?" Steele watched as more federal teams completed their documentation. The morning light revealed details that thermal imaging had missed, subtle preparations that had turned his property into a perfect defensive position. "Iron, you need to hear this." Marcus's voice carried new information. "Just got word from county law enforcement. 3 other criminal organizations in the region have completely abandoned their territories. Your message wasn't just received, it's revolutionizing the entire tactical situation." Through his advanced optics, Steele spotted more evidence teams, discovering abandoned equipment in the forest. The Red Reaper's panic had been so complete that they'd fled without even attempting to hide their tactical gear. "Commander, one more thing," Thompson said carefully. "Those operational plans we recovered, they detailed something bigger than just territorial expansion. They were building a private military empire, using criminal organizations as cover." Steele moved to his observation post, surveying the mountain landscape. The tactical situation had evolved far beyond a simple property defense. He'd unknowingly disrupted a major criminal enterprise's entire strategic plan. "James," Sarah's voice carried fresh intelligence, "just intercepted some interesting communications. Private military contractors across 3 states are already modifying their operational protocols. Nobody wants to risk facing similar tactical expertise." The midday sun revealed more details of the night's engagement. Impact marks from breaching charges showed how committed Drake's forces had been to their assault. But they also showed how thoroughly Steele's preparations had defeated them. "Iron. Final numbers from state police," Marcus reported. "Total equipment seizure value exceeding 7 million. Plus enough evidence to prosecute criminal activities across 5 states. This isn't just a tactical victory, it's a strategic game changer." Through his surveillance system, Steele watched as federal teams prepared to transport the last of the prisoners. Drake's defeated expression told the story. This hadn't just been a tactical failure, but a complete psychological collapse. "Commander." "Steele." Carter's voice carried professional acknowledgement as he was led to a transport vehicle. "For what it's worth, you've changed everything. No private military contractor will ever underestimate defensive positions again." Agent Thompson approached one final time, holding more tactical analyses. "Mind explaining how you managed to maintain perfect tactical awareness despite their electronic warfare capabilities? Our technical teams are saying some of your countermeasures are years ahead of current technology." "Experience," Steele replied simply as he surveyed his property. Sometimes victory wasn't just about defeating your opponent. It was about advancing the entire field of tactical operations. "James," Sarah's voice carried final confirmation. "Just got word from military contacts. What happened here? It's already being discussed in special operations training. The Night 1 Delta Force commander rewrote defensive tactical doctrine. Through His thermal imaging, Steele watched the last federal teams completing their work. The engagement had proven that some skills never faded, some warriors never lost their edge. But more importantly, it had demonstrated the superiority of perfect defensive preparation over overwhelming force. Iron. Got something interesting, Marcus reported. Going through more seized communications. After your defense is activated, some of Chimera's professional operators actually tried to warn others off. Said they recognized genuine Delta Force expertise when they saw it. The afternoon sun cast long shadows as various law enforcement units finished their final tasks. Thompson approached one last time, his expression thoughtful. Commander, those integrated defensive measures, they're not just tactical innovations. They're a completely new approach to property defense. Any chance you'd consider documenting your methodology? Steele allowed himself a small smile as he surveyed his mountainside position. Sometimes victory wasn't just about defeating your opponent. No, it was about advancing the entire field of tactical knowledge. Through his advanced optics, he watched the last transport vehicles preparing to depart. The night had reminded everyone why Delta Force commanders earned their reputations, why some warriors never lost their edge. But more importantly, it had demonstrated that perfect defensive preparation could defeat any level of offensive force. James. Sarah's voice carried final intelligence. Just got confirmation. Private military contractors across the entire region are completely revising their tactical doctrine. Your defensive success here has changed the whole operational landscape. The Montana wilderness grew quiet as the last federal units departed. Sometimes, victory was about more than just defeating your opponent. It was about influencing the entire field of tactical operations. Through his surveillance system, Steele watched various teams completing their final duties. The engagement had proven that some skills never faded, some warriors never lost their edge. But more importantly, it had shown that perfect defensive preparation could overcome any tactical advantage. The mountain air carried a hint of more snow as James Steele began assessing repairs to his property. The night had changed more than just the local tactical situation. It had demonstrated principles that would influence defensive operations for years to come. Through his thermal imaging, he watched the last vehicles disappear down the mountain road. Sometimes victory wasn't just about defeating your opponent. It was about advancing the entire understanding of tactical excellence. The afternoon sun illuminated a landscape transformed not just by combat, but by the demonstration of perfect defensive execution. James Iron Steele had reminded everyone why Delta Force commanders earned their reputations, why some warriors never lost their edge. But more importantly, he'd shown that superior tactical understanding could defeat any level of offensive force. The Montana wilderness returned to its peaceful state as James Iron Steele surveyed his property one final time. What had started as a criminal attempt to seize strategic territory had evolved into something far more significant, a demonstration of why some warriors never truly lose their edge. Through the region, criminal organizations were already abandoning their territories, while private military contractors completely revised their tactical doctrine. The night had changed more than just the local situation. It had revolutionized the entire approach to defensive operations. In law enforcement circles, they still talk about the day a retired Delta Force commander single-handedly defeated a private military company and dismantled the largest criminal network in the Northwest. But more importantly, they remember the lesson. Some skills never fade, some warriors never lose their combat edge, and threatening a Delta Force operator on his own ground will always be the biggest mistake a criminal can make. The story of that snowy Montana night continues to influence tactical training across multiple agencies. It stands as testament that superior defensive preparation, guided by decades of special operations experience, can overcome any level of offensive force. If you enjoyed this incredible true story of tactical excellence and unwavering warrior spirit, make sure to hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Our channel brings you the most amazing real-life stories of combat veterans, tactical engagements, and warrior leadership that will leave you speechless. Don't miss our next video coming tomorrow. It's an absolutely mind-blowing account of how a retired Navy SEAL used his specialized training to protect an entire town from a dangerous criminal organization. Hit subscribe now and join our community of tactical and combat enthusiasts. The stories we share will change how you view tactical excellence forever.